Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs, je vous demande de regagner votre siège.
Please return to your seats, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can now have the conclusions of our two-day event. We have some very important speakers who will be making some concluding remarks. Mr. Chichester. We're also waiting for Mr. Van den Brande, but to my right there is now Mr. Chichester, the Vice President of the European Parliament. Then, of course, to my left there is Antonio Preto, who's the head of cabinet of Antonio Tajani. And then we also have Mr. Patriciello, who will have a very difficult task over the next few days and weeks, because he has the responsibility of getting a resolution voted by Parliament on the Commission's communication and therefore the future of the space strategy. Now, the Chairman kindly thanks interpreters for staying on. So without any further ado, I'll give the floor to the speakers to my left so that we can hear their views. Mr. Patriciello, would you like to start off? Please go ahead.
Grazie.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers of this event and these 2 days of work on European space policy. This has meant that we've had an opportunity to look in some detail at a subject which is really fascinating and which is one of the basic pillars for economic growth in Europe. This has become extremely topical, and this has been shown by the media interest in the launch of the first 2 satellites of Galileo. And this was the first step towards the European Union becoming more independent with regard to satellite navigation. So the achievement of this ambitious goal is to a large extent the result of Article 189 of the Lisbon Treaty, which very clearly confers on the European Union the responsibility to coordinate and consolidate national space policies and programs through an approach which would promote scientific, technical and progress and industrial competitiveness. The objective as set by the treaty recognizes the significance of space and services for community citizens in the area of social, economic and strategic considerations, and so that the European Union can compete at a world level. The treaty has given us a very sound legal basis to allow us to achieve the ambitious goals for which the institutions, particularly the Parliament, has to ensure that there are adequate resources and legal instruments. In the past few months, working in the ITRE committee, I've been working on a draft report on space strategy in the interests of citizens. The draft report will be voted on in the committee on the 22nd of November and probably endorsed by plenary in January. And this will be another step towards greater involvement of the community institutions in the area of space under the treaty provisions. And I do hope that the final version of the report will reflect the ambitious proposals which are contained in the draft. I'd like to refer to the disparity in treatment between the 2 strategic programs, GMES and Galileo. And this has been mentioned by a number of people who are very concerned. Even though the importance of Galileo is recognized by the Commission, one of the pillars of European space policy, which on the basis of the investments, 3.5 billion euros, the GMES also should be given the same treatment from an economic and strategic point of view. I'm convinced that only a space policy which would allow for resources in both programs, this would guarantee technological independence and political autonomy in Europe. and provide huge economic and social benefits to our citizens, and will also help towards job creation. For this reason, in the report that I will submit to my colleagues, I've said how disappointed I am by the decision of the Commission not to include GMES financing in the multi-annual financial framework 2014-2020, aware that without a financial plan, this might mean that the huge investments made so far would have been to no avail. So there are financial problems, it's true, but also management ones. And we have to ensure that the Commission's strategy also covers managerial aspects for the Galileo and GMS programs so that they can become truly operational. It's only by rationalizing the organizational structure of the programs that we can look at the management costs, the maintenance costs, and provide European citizens with a clear framework showing the goals and resources which in the long term will be deployed in the area of space. In the report, I stressed the need for Europe to be independent with regard to space and in its trade agreements in relation to the United States, Russia and China. And we have to ensure that there is no dependence on extra European suppliers with regard to key technologies. And together with the creation of a European situation awareness system, strengthen the activities of European countries with regard to research so that they can provide answers to the questions put by our citizens. For this reason, the ambitious European space policy goes hand in hand with support for the European industry. At a time when we are experiencing a very deep economic crisis, we have to ensure that the European Union can support this industry, which is essential in terms of competing. And it's only if we provide the industry with real prospects that we can expect that that resources are invested in this. It's only if the European industry maintains its leadership that we can actually become leaders in the field. Article 189 of the treaty has provided the legal base, and the prospects are incredible for our European citizens. We have to deliver, and I do hope that we will meet again soon and once again talk about the tremendous space achievements reached by the European Union.
Monsieur le rapporteur, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. I think that bodes well for the work you need to do in this Parliament in the future. Mr. Preto, can we hear from you from the Commission?
Oui. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Paoloni.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paoloni. Let me start off by thanking all of you for attending the meeting and for still being there at 1 o'clock to hear from us, and this after a very intensive discussion. When we started thinking with Mr. Paoloni about how the conference should be organized, we also looked at the date, and in picking this date we said we were taking a risk. Why? Well, because this conference now is taking place a few weeks after the 21st of October. And we said we might be celebrating a major success, or the event will be a nail in the coffin of the Galileo project. And I'm quite happy to be able to say to you that today and yesterday we were celebrating a major success of the European space policy. The launch in Kourou of the 2 satellites, which are now in orbit, and the news continues to be good, things are going smoothly. But the launch of those 2 satellites then means that the European Union, Europe, is now capable, through its institutions and in cooperation with ESA and other bodies, of putting in place a space policy. It's a first step. This is not the culmination of a project. It hasn't become operational yet, but it shines light on a bright future. The launch of these 2 satellites marks the dawn of a new age, and hopefully this now lays the foundations for a successful Galileo program. I've got a wonderful speech in English which has been prepared. It's wonderful, but I'm not going to read it out. I won't read it out because it's 1 o'clock, and to start reading out a speech to all of you is a bit boring. And you had Mr. Tajani with you yesterday. He stayed for a lot longer than was originally envisaged. Mr. Pironi was very happy because you thought that he was only going to be there for 30 minutes or so, but he stayed for quite a bit longer. It's also because of you, of course. He liked you as an audience. He was happy to see you. He liked the atmosphere. So thank you once again for making this such a successful event. But as the head of Mr. Tajani's cabinet, I'd like to focus on a number of important issues. We've heard that the space policy is important for our economy, for various sectors, that it has a spillover effect for many of our other policy areas. And I don't think it's going to be very useful for me to rehearse that same message. And there's no need for me to go over things which have already been covered by others. As the head of cabinet of a commissioner, I think I need to reiterate the commitment which my political master has taken. That is my role. Now, following the successful launch in Kourou, which provided us with a much needed fillip and gave us a boost, I think it's now important to continue our efforts. We put a lot of effort into the launch. The people who were involved did a sterling job, and they also know how much Mr. Tajani was pushing for that launch. It's a feel-good story. We need success stories in these times. It's important in the short and medium term to achieve success as well, especially within a longer term project. We need successes along the way as much as we need the air that we breathe. But again, it's only a first step towards the future launch of other satellites, so that we can complete the constellation and have 30 satellites in orbit. Now, we've set in train all of the necessary procedures for that. There's a new call for tender for the other satellites. Now, that's underway between now and 2013, and we'll have to wait for the bids to come in. Of course, once we have the bids, we'll be able to make progress, but that is already underway. So we're trying to do what we can within the current financial perspectives. But our objective, as I've already said, is very much to achieve the completion of the constellation of 30 satellites. And in the document on the multi-annual financial framework, we have also made a proposal to that end for Galileo, and the Commission is putting 7 billion on the table. That's the proposal. And that means that with those resources, we guarantee the continuity of Galileo. It won't just allow us to complete the constellation of 30 satellites, but it was also cover maintenance costs for the infrastructure, which we own, and that's something we shouldn't lose sight of. This is a major European project, and we're the owners. We have ownership. So, within the European Commission, we have done our utmost to make sure that Galileo can be funded and that the necessary assurances are in place. And I'll cover GMES in a moment, because I know that many of you want to hear from me about that. Now, I moved from Parliament to the Commission, and when I arrived at the Commission on my first day, I was surprised to hear extra costs being mentioned. Now, I like budgetary discipline, and when I heard Galileo being mentioned, extra costs were mentioned in the same breath. It surprised me at the time. It no longer surprises me now. It no longer surprises me now, and it no longer surprises my political master. And I think Mr. Tajani said yesterday that now we're moving from extra costs as the watchword to savings. Well, that's a major achievement to have gotten away from extra costs. It means that we've managed to change the way in which the project was managed. And we're no longer talking about extra costs, but also about savings. So we have the infrastructure. It will be managed. We are achieving savings against what was forecast. And that's because we now have a system in place that works. We have a unit within the Commission that works well. That's paramount to the system being run smoothly. Of course, we have very good cooperation with the European Space Agency. Internal audits and controls are in place, and our relations with the other bodies that carry out the necessary checks are good. And Mr. Tajani, of course, Tajani believes in competition. And competition is an instrument, not an objective, is an instrument that allows you to obtain the best service at the best price, the best value for money for the European taxpayers. So we've achieved certain results already, and I'm sure more results will come in. But we also, of course, face important challenges. We need to make sure that the momentum that was created with the launch on the 21st of October is not lost. And we need to look at the governance of all of the programs together, and then, of course, look at the governance of the specific programs. And I think the roundtable we had this morning is very important, and between now and the next few weeks we will put forward a number of specific proposals. But I would like to reassure the European Parliament and the others that the Commission wants to make sure that the community method is applied and that the respective roles do not change. that needs to be at the heart of our space policy. We have the treaty, we have the legal basis, it contains obligations, and we want to keep to them because we believe in our space policy and the industrial policy for space that we are going to put forward next year. So over the next few weeks we will put forward a number of specific proposals for the governance of Galileo and GMES. And the Commission will have an important role to play in terms of controls. There will be an increased role for the agency. Mr. Weissenberg made the point already, and I would confirm what he said. And of course, we will have to have very close cooperation with the member states, with the European Space Agency, and everyone needs to play its role. And our ideas, our thinking is pretty clear, and that will be borne out by the proposals we put forward in a couple of weeks. And of course we'll also have to make sure that the proposals the Commission makes for the next multi-annual financial framework are supported by the budgetary authorities, in particular Council and Parliament. Of course we're happy to discuss things, and we welcome the contributions made this morning by many of you in the discussion, and I've certainly taken note of what was said during the previous panels. But we need to ensure continuity, and we need to make sure that we renew our commitment. That's the main message. Once we get down to the nitty-gritty and the detail, we can always find a solution, but that's my main message. There is 7 billion for Galileo, and of course the Commission has now taken the decision to take GMES out of the multi-annual financial framework. That doesn't mean that the Commission no longer believes in GMES. As Director General Jean said, we have a limited EU budget. The finance ministers are bringing pressure to bear on there not being a budget increase, so something has got to give. A solution needs to be found, and what we've put forward is one solution. If Parliament and Council and the Member States are happy to discuss matters, and discussions are already underway, and if a solution can be found to continue with GMES, then of course we would very much welcome that. But whatever solution we go for cannot go to the detriment of other policy areas. So a solution needs to be found. And that brings me to my closing remarks. We will put forward a strategy for the industrial space policy. We believe that the space sector has an important role to play for economic growth, for innovation in Europe. It's a high-tech sector, and we're competitive on a world market in that sector. So it's of strategic importance, and I'm sure that that will be a very interesting discussion next year. We believe in space, and we believe in the contribution that space can make to the lives of our citizens. It's the title of the conference, and the title was taken and chosen carefully, and it's also something that chimes with Mr. Tajani's views and convictions. Space doesn't just have a value as such, it has a value because it's relevant to our citizens. And programs such as Galileo and GMES are there at the service of our citizens. Of course, they have significant industrial and economic ramifications, but it also needs to have relevance for our citizens, and that's why we organized this conference. We wanted to show how space policy can contribute to civil protection, health, agriculture, and so on. I could go on for very long. But we wanted to make it clear that space policy is not just about launching satellites or space exploration, but it's also something which is there at the service of our citizens. That's the main message we want to get across. And once that message has been put across, I think we'll have the political backing to continue. Thank you.
Merci, Antonio.
Thank you, Antonio. I'm going to give the floor to Mr. van den Branden from the Committee of the Regions. And you hosted us, and you are also committed, and I know that you expect from the regions that they also make a commitment. Thank you very much. Well, if I've understood correctly, Chairman, colleagues, Mr. Preto's approach is that it's best to make a speech that isn't prepared. So wouldn't it be better then not even to make a speech at this stage?
It's important to notice, and I'm saying it as President of our Civics Commission and former President of the Committee of the Regions, that and it is not to please the initiators of this initiative, that I want really to thank everybody who was contributing towards the discussion on the future of the Union's space policy. And I want just to make a few reflections. And to summarize briefly, I'm pleased to note that we all share an awareness of space policy as a major contributor to the success of the Europe 2020 strategy for growth and jobs based on innovation, if possible, smart innovation. I believe that innovation has always to be smart as a matter of fact. New satellite technology applications will evidently emerge in the coming years, and their success will depend on our ability as policymakers to facilitate the introduction of innovative services. As always, I think that the first political task is to serve and to go for the right framework to see initiatives raising up. And in addition to the cohesion funds, Europe should provide direct support and incentives to cover the initial costs of end users of satellite technology services, in particular to local and regional authorities and SMEs. And in many cases, and that's a point I want to make clearly, regions and cities are already end users of information provided by satellite services. Environmental monitoring, improvement of disaster response capacities, modelling of climate change impact, spatial mapping for infrastructure development, traffic management in real time, access to broadband communications for remote and sparsely populated regions. These are just a few examples showing the importance of space technology for the well-being of the citizens. And for this reason, we need an ambitious and clear Union space policy backed up with an appropriate level of funding from the Union budget. The Committee of the Regions, dear Chairman, dear colleagues, is currently preparing an opinion on the communication from the European Commission entitled Towards a Space Strategy for the European Union that benefits its citizens. And I think that it will be very useful to take on board the discussions and the reflections here. Regional networks such as Nereus testify to the major role played by local and regional authorities across the Union. I want nevertheless to make one remark. In this context, we could have expected the latest Commission communication on Union space policy not to remain silent on the role of local and regional authorities in the development of the future Union space policy. And it is not enough from now on that the Commission is by words saying that we can only achieve towards the Union 2020 strategy when not everybody is taken on board. It was just the failure of the Lisbon strategy to think that, and it was an illusion to think that it would be possible only to do it at state national level. So it is a question of credibility. And last word on GMS, I think that it has to be funded within the multiannual framework of the Union budget for 2014-2020. So it is a question of credibility, it is a question of better deliver to the citizens and to deliver more. And I think this is important to notice, and I urge the Commission to renew this approach. When everybody is not on board, we will not achieve. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Chichester, you will wind up, and there'll be further debates in this House. But I give you the floor now.
Monsieur le Président, merci pour votre introduction.
Thank you for your introduction. And I just want to warn you all, I'm going to speak English.
Which will be to the relief of the interpreters. And can I congratulate everybody for your stamina in staying the course and possibly passing up lunch. And but I do want to say a few things, so I can't promise to be very brief, just quite brief. For my generation, space was the final frontier left to explore. It seemed new and exciting, and I became interested through the fiction of my favourite childhood comic called The Eagle, which featured the adventures of Dan Dare the spaceman. Before space became reality with the competition between America and Russia to put the first man in space. I've been a fan of science fiction to this day because of the way it opens up the possibility that anything you can imagine is possible to achieve or create. Anything you imagine. Nowadays, people are more laid back about space exploration, which means that it takes something pretty spectacular to catch their interest. And this is a pity, because a great deal of the work that is being carried on is of much interest to the scientific community and indeed to economists, for it is of direct relevance to how we live and work. I have the sense that at EU level we are feeling our way towards a policy that tackles this challenge, as well as the more immediate objectives of space applications. And I hope you will feel that this conference has taken us a long way in meeting this challenge, given the truly stellar list of contributors. English listeners may recognise my reference there. I have had the benefit of visiting ESA at Noordwijk in the Netherlands and at their headquarters outside Rome. I came away very impressed with the work they do. More than once, I have been on the verge of going to Kourou to observe a launch, only to be denied by one reason or another. And now, we in the Parliament have been given an enhanced role in space policy under the Lisbon Treaty, so I look forward to a closer involvement through my work on the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, and maybe a chance of a visit to Kourou. I am sure you will have heard plenty about the detail and range of space operations and policy in this conference. So I would merely like to add a thought about the importance of engaging the public in the work that is carried on under the umbrella of space activities. The International Space Station project, for example, means that there is again manned space activity, which is something inevitably the public will be more likely to take an interest in. But I am sure we need to engage them with all the other fascinating work going on, and I only wish I could think up a way to do it. The difficulty is, of course, that in our present economic troubles, any worthwhile project would be expensive and open to challenge by the eagle eyes of the Budget Control Committee and worse, the press. So I leave this thought floating, as it were, weightlessly. In closing, let me reiterate the support of the Parliament for achieving a space policy. I'd like to congratulate my colleague, Mr. Patriciello, on his excellent report, and I'm very pleased to hear from my former colleague, Mr. Prato, that funding for Galileo is secure. At least I thought I heard that. And I would like finally to thank Mr. Paolini and the organisers for running such a successful conference. Thank you.
Un double merci donc, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chichester. Unfortunately, the interpreters will be leaving now, so the conference will continue in English.
I'm very aware of the fact that I'm the one standing between you and lunch. Nevertheless, I'm also very happy to be able to address you as the director of ESPI, which, as I hope you know, is a European Space Policy Institute. And I've been asked in very, very, very summary form to draw a couple of conclusions from what we have heard over the last 2 days that have been incredibly rich. You know, as the head of a think tank dealing with space, you're always bombarded by information. But it is rare that you are bombarded with so much information of such high quality as over the last 2 days. So if I summarize, I see you are nervous, so I summarize very quickly that one of the things that one can see is indeed, as one of the speakers have said before, that the dialogue that we are having is evolving. The emphasis changes from year to year. And one emphasis which we see coming very clearly compared to the past is now that space has to be a utility, has to have a utilitarian approach. It has to be space for the citizen, where in the past perhaps we were discussing more space as a pure discipline in isolation. I think it is very good news that we are now focusing on the utilitarian aspects. What we also heard in the evolution of the debate is that there's more talk about security and defense. This is something we will be sure to hear more about in the coming years. We need to think long and hard about this. And we heard also about the role of space increasingly as a geopolitical tool, as an issue in international relations. Again, something we need to think very hard and carefully about, and also very quickly, because we see how geopolitics is increasingly playing a role in space. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, we heard 4 letters almost all the time. Not a 4-letter word, but 4 letters. GMES, which is an acronym, which is ultimately an acronym for success. And I think all speakers agreed that it must remain an acronym for success. There were certainly different perspectives, different solutions suggested, but I think what is really the common denominator is the determination to continue and also to make sure that this is on a communitarian basis, however we construct that. So, final remark, what we will do as a think tank is we will try to summarize these rich debates in a 10-page round paper which should be available in the not-too-distant future, and a flyer where we try to make it even more user-friendly, a couple of bullets, 1 page, and this you will be able to access on Business Bridge's website and on the website of ESPI. Thank you very much.
Je voudrais remercier toutes les interprètes avant qu'elles ne quittent leur cabine. Merci pour votre patience, merci pour votre aide. Je voudrais, si vous le voulez bien, remercier les orateurs qui m'ont accompagné jusqu'au bout de cette journée. S'il me donne une seconde, je vais faire quelques remerciements comme à la fin d'un film pour dire que nous devons remercier le Parlement européen qui nous a accueillis, remercier les présidents de cette institution, de la Commission européenne et du Conseil de l'Union européenne qui ont donné leur parrainage. Nous allons remercier bien entendu M. Tajani, mais nous l'avons fait aussi hier, la DG Entreprise qui est sous sa responsabilité, avec à mes côtés M. Antonio Preto qui nous a beaucoup aidés, ainsi que les autres membres de son cabinet, son aide les plus précieuses, M. Paul Weissenberg, bien sûr, M. Gonzalez, mais je vais citer aussi M. Didier Schmitt, Mme Michelier, M. Gazoul, Mme Ménard, qui nous ont aidés tout au long de ce chemin. Permettez-moi aussi de remercier la Commission, parce que 2 commissaires ont bien voulu venir avec nous, Mme Georgieva et Mme Hedegaard. Au Parlement européen, j'ai déjà fait mes remerciements, mais je voudrais remercier en particulier M. Vittorio Prodi et le Sky and Space Intergroup et Mme Oriana Grasso qui nous a beaucoup aidés dans cette démarche. Merci tous les parlementaires qui sont venus à cette tribune, tous ceux qui sont venus dans cette salle, tous ceux qui nous ont entendus et déjà fait part de leurs remarques. Permettez-moi aussi, bien entendu, de remercier l'Agence spatiale européenne, M. Dordain, toute son équipe à Paris et hors de Paris, en Europe, mais aussi le précieux concours du bureau de Bruxelles, sans lequel beaucoup de choses n'auraient pas pu être faites ici. Je remercie aussi, bien sûr, le CDR, qui nous a accueillis hier et qui aujourd'hui est représenté par M. Van den Brand. Mme Bresso n'a pas pu être des nôtres, mais elle a été bien représentée. Permettez-moi aussi de terminer en remerciant Eurospace, c'est-à-dire tous les industriels du secteur et les autres partenaires qui aussi ont été les piliers de cette journée et demie. Mais je pourrais citer tous les personnes qui sont venues ici au nom de leur société. C'est un tout petit peu long, mais en tout cas, aussi bien Arianespace que Astrium, que Eutelsat, que Inmersat, que SES, que Telespazio, Thalys, T-Systems, OHB, ESOA, Newtech, NSR, et j'espère que j'en oublie pas. Merci à tout le monde, merci à vous tous, et j'espère à l'année prochaine. Merci.
Thank you. A special thanks to Mark Paoloni and all the staff of Business Bridge Europe for the fantastic organization of this event. We look to meet again here next year for the 5th conference.